And it's fundamentally a psychological phenomenon, right?
Exactly.
It's people that are, what we joke that Bitcoin's an IQ test, right? People sort of figuring it out in different layers based on, I guess, their different worldviews or frameworks that, because Bitcoin is something very, like even the Austrians, right? It was outside of their framework or worldview. So its emergence was not something we could easily assimilate into anyone's worldview, really. So it seems like it kind of had to follow that path, cypherpunks, libertarians, and outward from there.
Whoever's ready to understand it. And I like to say that in our world, the process of monetization is obviously happening a lot faster than gold. But I like to say information travels at the speed of light, but understanding does not.
No, that's right. Way to put it.
So that's why Bitcoin isn't instantly monetized, despite being the best form of money objectively that humanity has ever seen.
Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer.
Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's Wolf NYC, WOLFNYC.com.
Vijay Boyapati, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Thanks for having me, Robert. I'm a big fan of yours, so I'm really excited to speak with you.
Well, I'm a bigger fan of yours because you were instrumental in my orange pilling. The bullish case for Bitcoin.
That's right. Take the orange pill. That's what I like to say.
One of the greatest essays ever written on Bitcoin. You are the definition of an OG. You've been around for quite a long time, and you've inspired many people's rabbit hole journey, I think. So thank you for that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And we were just talking offline about what we're going to talk about. And one of the things that came up was that the Austrian economists, which you and I both look up to in many respects, may have actually been wrong about money and not conceiving of Bitcoin even as a possibility prior to its inception. And I thought that would be a fun topic to go into today, where the Austrian economists might be wrong, given that they're right about so many things against the backdrop of Keynesian economics. So where should we start on that topic?
So I'm a student of Austrian economics. I've read, the magnum opus, I think, in the field of Austrian economics, which is Ludwig von Mises's Human Action, which lays out a very comprehensive foundation for how you approach economics and the methodology of Austrian economics, which I subscribe to, which is that price formation comes from our actions. We analyze it from the bottom up, which is human actions and our motivations ultimately create these economic phenomena. And you should start from the bottom up, as opposed to looking at economic aggregates and trying to find correlations and then trying to create rules in a way that you would with physics or chemistry. It really does not apply because economics and economies are inherently complex systems. So you really need to start by understanding the underlying causality, and that's the method of the Austrians. So I was an student of Austrian economics before I knew anything about Bitcoin, and I was what you would call a gold bug. I thought gold was a great form of money, and you couldn't print more of it. So when I was first exposed to Bitcoin, I was first really skeptical. Like, this is created de novo out of nothing. How does this have any value? And a lot of Austrians said, well, it shouldn't have any value. It's created out of nothing. It's kind of a paper fraud. It's a Ponzi scheme. And this is going to go away. And it didn't go away. I discovered Bitcoin in 2011. And by 2012, I was like, there's something here. And I think my background in Austrian economics led me to believe this is a kind of money. And that's when my journey down the rabbit hole began. And how do you even understand this thing? And I think the question of how Bitcoin has any value, it has a price level, is the most important economic question of the last century. And I think the prominent Austrians, really failed on this issue because they had the tools to understand Bitcoin, but they were so badly misapplied, and a lot of them, I think, are not very familiar with technology, and to understand Bitcoin is a multi-dimensional thing, right? You need to understand economics, but you also need to understand a little bit of computer science, a little bit of legal theory, a little bit of game theory. And I think the Austrians, a lot of them were missing some of those pieces, so they dismissed it really early. And I think it's one of the great tragedies in the history of Austrian economics that we have this new form of money created out of nothing that has the attributes of the best money that we've ever seen, that humanity's ever seen, and it was misunderstood. I think there was a huge miss for Austrians, and I think a big failure. That's not to say I have any animosity towards any of these Austrians. A lot of them are people who I've learned a lot from and who have had a lot of influence on me. I just think it's a big failure. And I really, the thing that bothers me most is that they never came around to realizing how important this is.
Sure.
This is something that requires attention and study. And the thing I think it really should teach us is that we need to be students of money. And, I think you've got a great title for your podcast, because this is a huge question that we don't understand. I think Bitcoin exposed that. The Austrians, as insightful as they were on money and the history of money, missed something here. And Bitcoin is something that can teach us. And I think we should be students. I think we should have some humility and say, what are the things that we missed in the Austrian account on the origin of money that aren't correct? And I think there were a few big ones, to be honest, that were missed.
Yeah, and I think the central issue here is what's called the Mises Regression Theorem. Hope I'm saying that correctly. And just to echo back what you're saying, like, even the great Austrian economists, right, the libertarian philosophers, the giants upon whose shoulders we stand, brilliant, right, in many respects, they still kind of missed this thing about money. There's something about money that even they didn't understand, that they perceived Bitcoin as something that did not fit into that framework. And clearly we're generalizing here. I think we're going to focus on particular thinkers like Rothbard in his evaluation of the Mises Regression Theorem. But it's just, I think, another reminder of how complex of a topic this really is. And after having done this show for 300 plus episodes, I still have more questions about it than I do answers. And we've accumulated a lot of answers to the question, what is money? But each answer seems to generate more questions. So it's no one's fault. We're not pointing at anyone saying like they messed up or screwed up, but it's, I think, just a reminder of how complex this domain is.
Absolutely. And money is such a central thing in any economy. It's a critical thing to understand. And you're absolutely right. We don't have a full grasp on it. So you mentioned the regression theorem, and the regression theorem was was a concept created by Ludwig von Mises in the early 20th century. And he was trying to explain, where does the value of money come from? Why do people value, why is the price whatever it is today? Why is the price of bread a certain way? And his explanation for it was pretty simple, actually. And intuitive when you think about it. It's one of those ideas in economics, when you think about it, you're like, oh, that's obvious. Well, the price of bread is $4 today because it was $4 yesterday. And most people remember that, and they would think something's wrong if it suddenly jumped to $8. They would go to the grocery store and say, I'm not going to buy your bread. It was $4 yesterday. Yeah. And well, why was it, $4 or close to $4 yesterday, maybe $3.99 yesterday? Well, it's because it was that the day before. And his idea was that you kind of regress back in time. But to what? Where does that original value come from? Mm-hmm. And his explanation was that it comes from some useful commodity value. Mm-hmm. Like, before it was money, it was useful in some way. Mm-hmm. And so with gold used to be money in the 19th century. Where did that original price level come from? It came from the fact that people used gold for other things. Mm-hmm. So jewelry, religious ceremonies, those kind of things. And then von Mises had a student, Rothbard, prominent Austrian economist and libertarian and brilliant thinker, great guy. I have a lot of respect for him. And he interpreted Mises's theorem in a stronger way, which is, I interpret Mises's theorem as, here is an explanation for the origin of money as it happened with gold.
Right. Descriptive.
Descriptive. Exactly right. And Rothbard went further and made it prescriptive. He said, this is the only way that money can come about. Money can only come about in this process, and it must always originate as a useful commodity. And I think that influence, Rothbard was hugely influential in Austrian circles, and still is. Mm-hmm. I think that is what influenced a lot of modern Austrians to think that Bitcoin can't be money, because it wasn't a useful commodity. It was just this digital thing, and it wasn't really used for anything.
Yeah.
And so you have a lot of Austrians and gold bugs say, this is not physical, it's not tangible, you can't do anything with it. Yeah. So it can't possibly become money because of that original use value not being there. But of course, this is something that we can learn from. We can learn that, hey, something can gain an original value just as a whimsy. Mm-hmm. And that's what Bitcoin was. Why did people value it? Because humans sometimes value things for no reason at all. It's just cool. And those, original cypherpunks who were playing around with Bitcoin, they didn't know how to value it. They said, okay, how about 10,000 Bitcoins for a pizza? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They just put a random price on it, and someone was willing to pay. And so you get that first price.
Right.
And that first price with gold may have been, religious use, or may have been jewelry. First price for Bitcoin is just a random occurrence. Mm-hmm. But that's okay. And that's how price formation can begin, as a random occurrence. And then it builds on that. And the next time someone says, well, I saw that someone bought a pizza for 10,000 Bitcoin. That seems like some kind of reasonable value, so I'm going to build on that. And eventually a price level is discovered over time. I think that is one big mistake that the Austrians made, was that thinking there's an original commodity value.
Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, iCoin Technology. iCoin has just released a sleek new hardware wallet. It looks like a mini iPhone, a little touch screen and camera on it. The device has no Wi-Fi, no cellular connection, no GPS. It's a strictly physically cold hardware wallet. Like I said, it's got a high-res 3-inch touchscreen. It's got a camera for air gapping the wallet. It's got optional Bluetooth compatibility. And it's really a brand new UI, UX experience for a hardware wallet, making it very accessible, easy to use, not intimidating. And as we always talk about on this show, the only way you can truly own your Bitcoin is by having it in self-custody. So you need a device like iCoin Wallet to truly own your Bitcoin. Go to iCointechnology.com today and use promo code Bitcoin23 for 30% off of this new sleek hardware wallet. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, the Gold Investment Letter. The Gold Investment Letter helps sophisticated investors navigate capital markets and maximize their profits in trading gold, silver, and mining stocks. The gold investment letter seeks out the most undervalued companies and identifies special situations in the mining sector, and then provides in-depth analysis on both their financial positions and future prospects. The gold investment letter explores many complex domains, such as investor psychology, portfolio management, and macroeconomic trends, all with the goal of making you a better investor. The gold investment letter offers a free version and a paid premium version, and I strongly recommend you at least sign up for the free version, because after having read a few of these issues, I can promise you it is a treasure trove of good information. You can sign up for the free newsletter today at goldinvestmentletter.com.
Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, CrowdHealth. CrowdHealth is a Bitcoin-enabled alternative to legacy health insurance. Now let's face it, legacy health insurance is an absolute scam. Nobody can explain this better than the legendary comedian Chris Rock.
This is insurance. You got to have some insurance. You got to. There's an insurance. They shouldn't even call it insurance. They should just call it in case shit. Like, I give a company some money in case shit happens. Now, if shit don't happen, shouldn't I get my money back?
So with CrowdHealth, instead of just paying premiums that you'll never see again, you can hold part of this pool of savings in dollars and in Bitcoin through CrowdHealth. And when you have a health event, you can draw against this pool of communal savings. So go to joincrowdhealth.com/breedlove to learn more or sign up.
Another big one, I think, is a big hole in the Austrian account of the monetization of any economic good is the role of speculation. That speculators will see an economic good being monetized. And when any form of money is being monetized, it's generally very fixed in supply, has inelastic supply. That's true of gold and all the things that were chosen by humans as money. As the demand grows for that thing, the price is going to start skyrocketing, right? There will be speculation in that price appreciation. People will see the price appreciating and say, I want to get ahead of that, so I'm going to buy some Bitcoin. And that's actually a feedback loop that hastens the process of monetization. And the Austrians never talked about that. They talked about something becoming more widely adopted because it was more marketable. So you want to do a trade, you're a fisherman and I grow apples, and it's hard to trade, so we look for something else which we both have, and then the most marketable good wins. That account, I think, has a lot of merit to it, but alongside that is the speculation. And that's the part they miss. So they see Bitcoin, they see these people investing it and, as they say, speculating in it, and they think, well, that can't be money. They poo-poo it, and they say people are speculating this is a speculative asset, but that is always going to be part of monetization. And I bet you, I'm not a historian of antiquity, but I bet you anything that there were people in antiquity who were speculating in gold as well, who saw that gold was spreading out around the world as trade routes expanded and trade deepened amongst different countries. New countries would adopt gold, and I'm sure that there were people who recognized the value of gold seems to be increasing in our city or our community. I want to own more gold. And that hastened the process of gold becoming money in those communities. When merchants see something becoming valuable and they want it, that becomes the more marketable good. So I think there's an interplay here that the Austrians didn't appreciate, and I didn't appreciate, to be honest, before I discovered Bitcoin. But being a student and sitting back and observing what's happened with Bitcoin, I think it's absolutely true and obviously true that when something appreciates in price because it's becoming more widely adopted, someone's going to start speculating in that. Entrepreneurs always see opportunities, and they always begin speculation when they see those opportunities.
And it's interesting because in your essay, The Bullish Case for Bitcoin, I think does a great job explaining this very issue, that it's a game theoretic process, right? It's people see a good being adopted as a store of value, its purchasing power, price is increasing, and people will just, look out into the future, extrapolate and think, what if this keeps happening? Why don't I buy some of this thing now, which contributes to the reservation demand for the good, which increases its price? which spurs further speculation, and like the cycle can get out of hand, obviously, right? Tulip mania and things like this. But it does seem to be instrumental to the process of monetization. And on Mises regression theorem, all you need is some original reservation demand, right? Like just some, it doesn't have to be a commodity use per se. It's just like, are people holding this thing for any reason whatsoever? So with Bitcoin, the early days was like this weird collectible.
Yep.
Right? There's only 21 million of these things. I'm getting them through a faucet on a website. I've got 1,000 of 21 million. And eventually it was the pizza was one of the first trades. Then they started to map the price to the electricity necessary to produce the Bitcoin. And then that started that bootstrapping process of price discovery.
Yep.
And so it seems like, and Austrians should have understood that, because what does Mises say? Like, all human action is speculative, actually. Yes. So everything you do, you can't possibly know the outcome. You're basically speculating that your intention is going to map to the outcome you're trying to create. Sometimes that happens, sometimes that doesn't. Mm-hmm. But there's this inherent speculative nature to human action itself. So I'm surprised that at least Rothbard, I guess we can't speak on behalf of Mises, obviously, because as you said, he laid it out more as a descriptive account of monetization, not a prescriptive. So maybe he would have seen it differently, but Rothbard at least maybe took it a step too far, making it prescriptive.
I think so, and I like the way you described it. All you need is that original reservation demand, and I think it's only a small change to Mises's regression theorem to make it apply to Bitcoin as well.
Yeah.
But I think it is a lost opportunity and a disappointment, and I hope that folks in the Austrian community will come back, because I really do believe we're at this important epoch where a new money has been created and it deserves a lot of attention. And it was only the people who weren't necessarily, you wouldn't call them Austrians, but people who were influenced by the Austrians, I think, who had the deepest insights. And I was really influenced by Nick Szabo.
Yes.
And his essay on the origins of money. Shelling out, exactly right.
Yeah.
He took the view of more of an anthropologist and looking at the history and what was used as money and why was it used and where did it come from, and the idea that originally it was kind of a proto store of value. It wasn't a medium of exchange. And if you asked him, are you an Austrian economist? I think he would probably say no.
Right.
But he was definitely influenced by the Austrians. He read Hayek.
Yeah.
And he would describe to to Austrians, like, well, money doesn't need to originate as a commodity. It can work just as something that's created out of nothing. And as long as you have these ways of guaranteeing that there's scarcity and people have confidence in that scarcity and various other attributes, then it can happen. And he was just dismissed. And it was only the advent of Bitcoin, I think, that really validated what he believed.
Yes. And you're, again, not too many shout outs for your essay here, but the loop, right? The feedback loop. Mm-hmm. Actually, reading your essay, The Bullish Case for Bitcoin, is what inspired me I created those graphics in my early writings. They're little feedback loops, right? It's like person identifies good, they're using it, they're holding it for whatever reasons, reservation demand. Other people speculate on this thing, continue to be used as a store of value or to continue to have reservation demand. Mm-hmm. Then they start to acquire it, and then that further pushes it up. And there is this, that feels right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of what we see in the world. It's what we see in Bitcoin. We see all kinds of speculators, right? They'll speculate on oil fields, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
You're just making these bets that the thing is going to be in greater demand in the future. Mm-hmm. But those very bets actually contribute to the registration of demand for the thing. So it's an interesting, it's not linear, right? It's circular in a way.
Mm-hmm. I have two comments just about what you're saying with reservation demand that I don't think are mentioned very often. But one is reservation demand is a really important concept, but I don't think many people define it. And I like to define it as an extended period of time when someone wants to hold that good. Mm-hmm. And you can see a spectrum here. On the one end of a spectrum, as something becomes more and more monetized, the average duration that someone wants to hold it increases because you view it as savings and you don't want to let go of it, except when you need to let go of it. So you hold it longer and longer. But the other end of the spectrum is when reservation demand starts disappearing, you get hyperinflation. And what's happening is the duration at which someone wants to hold that thing shrinks and shrinks and shrinks to the point where it becomes a hot potato, right? In a hyperinflating monetary system, people get money and they get rid of it as quickly as possible. Like, oh, I got paid my money, I'm going to the grocery store right away. Because if I don't go to the grocery store, it's not worth anything.
Right.
So it's that length of time which really defines reservation demand. That's one idea I think that people need to talk about a little bit more. The other one is, I think as students of money, we've learnt something else, which is this process of monetization does not happen in a linear way. We're learning that with Bitcoin, it happens in these kind of wild cycles. And I'm sure this happened with gold too. It's just spread out over millennia. It's spread out over 5,000 years. So you didn't really notice it and there was no data collected. But now we can see it happens in these hype cycles. And what I think is happening is that in each hype cycle, you get a cohort of people who have enough knowledge to understand that Bitcoin is important. And the cohort just seems to grow each time. The first cohort were the cypherpunks.
Yeah.
And then you get a hype cycle and you run out of cypherpunks.
Yeah.
And then you get a crash. You get a crash. And the next cycle is libertarians. Like, oh, these guys, we kind of relate to the cypherpunks. They have the same values as us. This thing could be important. And then you run out of libertarians.
Yeah.
And then you get early adopters.
Yeah.
And you run out of early adopters. And then you get the mainstream. And so that's something I don't think we knew before. The process of monetization happens in a sort of strange fractal pattern.
Yes.
Where each cycle looks like the prior cycle just zoomed out.
Right. And it's fundamentally a psychological phenomenon, right?
Exactly.
It's people that are, what we joke, that Bitcoin's an IQ test, right? People sort of figuring it out in different layers based on, I guess, their different worldviews or frameworks that, because Bitcoin is something very, like even the Austrians, right? It was outside of their framework or worldview. So its emergence was not something we could easily assimilate into anyone's worldview, really. So it seems like it kind of had to follow that path. Cypherpunks, libertarians, and outward from there.
Whoever's ready to understand it. And I like to say that in our world, the process of monetization is obviously happening a lot faster than gold. But I like to say information travels at the speed of light, but understanding does not.
No, that's right. Way to put it.
So that's why Bitcoin isn't instantly monetized, despite being the best form of money objectively that humanity has ever seen. The process of monetization is not going to happen overnight because each person has to come to their own understanding why there's a comparative advantage of holding their savings in Bitcoin versus gold or dollars or government bonds or whatever else it is.
Yeah, and my hypothesis at least is the vast majority of people learn that through pain, actually, right? It's there's few people that will do the cognitive labor to kind of come to such a conclusion. It's more typical of people to suffer hyperinflation or some other form of oppression before they realize, hey, maybe I do need savings that's independent of government control or manipulation. That's really interesting.
Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Wasabi Wallet. With Wasabi Wallet, you can receive, send, and store Bitcoin privately. In Wasabi Wallet, your transaction history and wallet balance are completely hidden. Wasabi Wallet is easy to use, all of its privacy features are built in by default, and it works with any amount of Bitcoin. Wasabi users can make CoinJoin transactions together with BTC Pay server users or Trezor Suite users. For BTC Pay server users, they can make payments directly inside of a CoinJoin, and for Trezor Suite users, you can make CoinJoins directly on a hardware wallet. These features result in fee savings and security improvements for both sets of users. So go to wasabiwallet.io today to download the state-of-the-art Bitcoin privacy wallet. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Casa. Casa makes it simple to buy and secure your Bitcoin without wondering whether you're doing it right. Specifically, Casa provides a multi-key custody solution, which is by far the most secure way to custody your Bitcoin. Now, when I talk about Bitcoin being theft-proof money or inviolable private property, a multi-key custody model is exactly what I am talking about. Using multiple keys lets you maintain full control of your Bitcoin while also giving you redundancy in case you lose one of the keys.
It's also the best way to secure your Bitcoin for inheritance planning purposes. So go to keys.casa, that's C-A-S-A, today to sign up and use discount code BREEDLOVE.
Now, you also wrote a paper in 2008 or
2010.
2010,
Yep.
so after
Yep.
2008.
Yep.
And this was a time of great quantitative easing, right? We had the great financial crisis, pursuant to which I think we printed somewhere in the neighborhood of $700 billion.
It actually ended up being trillions. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet increased by about 4 trillion in 2008 and 9.
Wow. Okay.
Yep.
The initial authorization, I think, was 700 billion.
Yes. Yep.
And then
Yep. The top program.
It's never enough, right?
Yeah.
They always add to it. And at the time, this is another area where the Austrians they were wrong, I guess. There was a general consensus among Austrian economists that they thought this would lead to hyperinflation of the US dollar and I guess presumably other fiat currencies. But your paper that you wrote in 2010 took a different opinion, and you thought that that was not going to be the case, and turns out you were right. So could you walk us through what happened, and how did you get to that conclusion that was countervailing the general consensus from Austrians?
Yeah, so I subscribe to the methodology of Austrian economics, but I think you have to start with the correct assumptions and the correct understanding of how to apply that methodology. And I think the problem was a lot of Austrians didn't understand the banking system. And I had a debate, I remember, with Bob Murphy at the time on whether we'd have hyperinflation or not. I think it was about a year ago, he interviewed me and conceded that I had won that bet, that we did not have hyperinflation. And what we saw in the years after 2008 and 9 was kind of a controlled deflation where prices were very low and sometimes went negative. So the Federal Reserve increased its balance sheet by trillions of dollars, and those trillions of dollars sat as reserves in the banking system. And really, for you to see inflation, you need that money to be lent into the economy. And this is what's called the money multiplier theory. The banks have deposits, they're taking deposits, and then they lend them out. And when they lend them out, it goes to someone, and that person deposits in the bank, and it gets loaned out again and again. And that balloons the money supply. And
also, $1 becomes hundreds or thousands even.
Exactly right. Yeah. And Austrians subscribe to that model of money expansion, which is the causality is that the Fed creates reserves, the banks loan it out and fraction it up so it gets to 10 or 100 times what it was, and it expands the money supply, and then you get inflation because you've got all this extra money floating around in the economy. The problem is that causality is not correct, and it's kind of a mistaken understanding of how banks work. And it basically says that banks are sitting there waiting for reserves from the Fed before they make loans. That is not how banks work. And I remember speaking to a banker who's actually a very prominent Austrian who used to work at the Mises Institute about this, and he made a comment to me. He's like, unfortunately, these guys just don't seem to understand how loans work at banks. And he didn't want to correct them because it's kind of a sensitive topic to contradict some of these ideas which have been set in stone. But banks, the way the loans work is that banks will just make loans. They will go out and make as many loans as they can that they think are profitable. And if they don't have enough reserves to back those loans, they'll just go looking for those reserves. And if there's a lot of demand for reserves, the Fed will see that and it will accommodate the bank's demand to produce loans by producing more reserves. So this is a really subtle point that's not well understood, but it's kind of the difference of between is the Fed the dog and the banking system is the tail, or is the banking system the dog and the Fed is the tail?
Right.
And I was concluding it was the latter. And so I was saying, okay, we're not going to have inflation because the banks ultimately are the ones who are making the decisions about whether to loan or not. And the banks are in real trouble right now. They're capital constrained. They've suffered a lot of losses. They're trying to recapitalize. They have a ton of reserves, but they don't want to loan them out. It's almost like, imagine you have a drug dealer that's going around and giving out drugs to drug addicts, and eventually the drug addicts OD, and there's no more demand for loans.
Demand.
Yeah, there was it was not just the banks, it was the public as well.
Yeah.
People didn't want loans because they were, constrained. They've been wiped out, and the capital constraints increased on banks. So it was both sides. So the demand for loans plummeted. It did not matter that the Fed printed all of these reserves. It was as if they had created $1 trillion and buried it underground.
Right.
And so we didn't see hyperinflation. And I said we won't see anything like that for many, many years. Fast forward to 2020 and what happened with COVID is very different to quantitative easing. It wasn't just the creation of reserves. It was that the federal government was literally giving out money, putting it in people's hands.
Helicopter money.
Helicopter money, exactly right. It was kind of the Milton Friedman experiment. If you want to create inflation, just get in a helicopter and drop money from the sky. And they did that.
Yeah.
They did that. And so my view on what happened in 2020 was that we would probably see inflation. And we have seen inflation because that money gets directly in the economy. When you give money to a family who needs to buy groceries, it's going to get spent.
Yeah.
And so it's different to giving the money to a bank that's capital constrained, that doesn't want a loan, and where the public at large doesn't want loans.
Right.
So this was another big miss by Austrian economists, and I think these two things in the last decade or 2 decades were the two most important monetary questions the Austrians got wrong. And it's disappointing because if anyone had the tools to understand these phenomena, it was the Austrians, and it just in the wider Austrian community, they really missed on these two.
Do you still think the Fed is more reactive? If I understood you correctly, your view was the Fed was more reactive than proactive, right? The tail being wagged, I think. Is that still your view in the current economic situation where the Fed is now producing, what are we, like $8 trillion since March 2020, something to that effect? Are they still going to be reactive to the commercial banking sector, or do you think the Fed is the current distribution of money, which has been helicopter money, is that going to be, are they going to be more the dog, less the tail, I guess is the question.
I think that's a great question because I think it's true the Fed can be the dog. It's possible they have the power to be the dog.
Right.
And I think they're trying to be now because they've been behind the curve with this inflation. They didn't realize it was a problem. They didn't realize
denied it.
They denied it. They said it was transient. They didn't realize it had become structural. And so they're behind the curve and trying to fix the problem. The problem is they're really constrained in what they can do. They've increased interest rates to 5%, which is, a big jump. But it's certainly not anything like what Volcker did in the 1980s. And they're constrained because the government debt position is much, much higher than it was in the 80s. We have debt which is 130% of GDP, and that's not even including entitlements, which are just gigantic. So to increase the interest rate, the debt service on our debt actually becomes a big number. And if the Fed were to increase interest rates to, say, 10 or 15%, which really would probably would impact inflation and bring it down, that would make our debt servicing unsustainable.
Right.
You would have to tax 100% of everyone's income to pay the debt.
Yeah.
So they're behind the curve.
This is a rock and a hard place, basically.
They're trying to project confidence, and they're trying to convince the market they're serious. But the problem is they may not have enough ammunition to solve this problem. I think we're in a position in the US now where to solve the debt problem, you either raise taxes, incredibly difficult and politically unpopular, or cut spending, which is also incredibly unpopular and will not win your vote. So there's a third option, which is try and inflate away the debt.
Yeah.
And so that's always the politically most palatable option.
Yes.
So I think what we're going to see, given the position we're in now, is more of a structural inflation. And they let the genie out of the bottle with COVID because they just created so much money that inflation was not contained. And once you lose credibility as the Federal Reserve, it's really hard to get it back. People don't believe you, and all of their power comes from credibility.
Yes. Confidence game.
It's a confidence game.
Yeah.
Fiat money is ultimately a confidence game, and once you've lost that confidence, it's game over.
Wow. What are your current views on the U.S. dollar? Do you think we see obviously structural inflation, I think you just said. Do you think we see hyperinflation in our lifetimes and the years ahead? I know this is very hard to predict.
Well, since we're both going to live to 100, I think, I hope, I think we probably would see hyperinflation in our lifetime. I don't think it's an imminent phenomenon, and I'm always very careful to be try to be circumspect about this, because I think it's easy to be hyperbolic and say we're going to see hyperinflation next year. The US has a lot of assets. We have a lot of land that's very valuable, and we have a lot of productive capacity. So the US can service its debt for now. It's just the Fed can't get inflation under control without making it impossible to service the debt. So it's in this really awkward position of trying to say that it's getting inflation under control, but not really being able to do enough. And so I think we're going to be in this kind of awful middle ground where we see 5 to 6% inflation, and it'll go up or down. Maybe there'll be some years where it'll be 3, and there'll be some years where it's 8 or 9. And I think what we're going to see is a period kind of close to the 70s, and that ultimately culminates in a crisis when people really lose confidence in the dollar, and then you're on the verge of hyperinflation, and someone needs to make a very tough decision, which is
Volcker to break the back of inflation.
You need a massive recession. But again, is it possible? Is it possible for the Fed to do that without breaking the system overall? Volcker could do what he was able to do just because the US debt position in the 80s was 40% of GDP.
Right.
The US was able to service its debt.
Yeah.
And Reagan also kind of oversaw a period of incredible growth, because of deregulation and also because of Moore's law, and the advent of the computer age and productivity, and you can grow your way out of this problem.
And we may have some of those tailwinds with AI. Like, that's obviously hard to tell.
That's the one thing that could save us.
Yeah,
that's a really good point. I gave you 3 options, which was cut spending, raise taxes, or inflate your way out of it. You can also grow your way out of it.
Right.
And I hope that is something that happens, but we don't know. It's an open question.
Isn't that kind of a double-edged sword, though? Because it extends the life of fiat in a way. If we get more productivity, then there's more economic surplus to be harvested by the central bank, so sort of prolongs the life support of fiat. When really, I think, well, us morally and ethically would look to fiat to reach an earlier demise as being like a good outcome. So yeah, I don't know, that again feels kind of like a rock and a hard place. Like, sure, we want the productivity gains, that's good for the economy, but it also extends the life of fiat, which is a big problem.
Good and bad are often intermixed.
Yeah.
And I like to always think of the good as the good and call it good, and the bad as the bad and call it bad. Even though they interact, I think anything that can make us more productive and give us more wealth and more time with our kids and our families, those are good things that we should be happy about, even if it makes some bad things, last a little longer.
The yin and the yang came to me as you said that. Vijay, thank you for doing this, man.
Thanks for having me.
Where can people find you on the internet?
Probably the best place is Twitter, real_Vijay, and Medium, where my article is, and I have a book you can buy on Amazon, The Bullish Case for Bitcoin.
Beautiful. We'll link to all that in the show notes, and thank you again.
Thanks, Robert.
Yeah.